if your email and your password are compromised and you're a contractor, you could be used as a backdoor into that system. I don't know if you guys ever seen the movie Lawnmower Man. There was a maintenance backdoor. Spoiler alert. It's not a very good movie, by the way.
Securing AV systems, not everybody's favorite topic, but it's critical. We'll talk about what programmers, clients, and integrators need to know about securing your AV systems. All that and more on A State of Control. A State of Control, episode 131, Heads Will Roll. Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control, programming, and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. So today's show, we're going to talk about security. Don't groan. We're going to talk about security, and it's maybe a topic that some love to hate, but it's a necessary part of our industry, especially since we have more and more products on the network, and it is something that we all need to do to maintain the professionalism of what our business is. So with us to discuss that is somebody who's really a focused expert on this, and we're going to introduce him in just a minute. But before we do, I get to say hi to my partner here at A State of Control. He's Uncle Richie, Rich Fregosa. How are you, Rich?
I'm stationary this time, so it will not be if you get a chance and want to see high production values in editing at work, check last month's episode where Uncle Richie was on the road and Mitchell, our producer, had to, I think, weave together like 30 separate files as I was having all kinds of challenges along the way. So I'm glad to be stationary for, and back in the studio.
Stationary and secure, just to keep with our theme.
What are the exactly? Pick one or two, right?
So with us today is somebody who was with us back in episode 120, where we talked about the CrowdStrike incident. He is Paul Konikowski. He's from Cronos LLC. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, great to be back, Stephen, Uncle Richie. Good to see you guys again.
Thanks for being with us. And so, as I mentioned in the top, security is becoming a bigger part of kind of the conversation these days in AV. It's something that we all need to be thinking about. It's something that is part of our daily lives when we're talking about being on the internet and so forth. So it isn't something that it should be taken lightly, but it does require a little extra effort and a little thinking outside the box, if you will, and education and learning. So Rich, help me out here with starting the conversation about what our audience who are programmers and people wanting to know about programming control, what do they need to be thinking about these days when it comes to securing AV systems?
I think the first thing to realize is that it's going to become more of your day-to-day operation than less. It's one of those times where it's like, it's better to be good, better to be new because you're walking in and it's just kind of the baseline for you. I find that people who, much like us, who started out when you were not dealing on a corporate network and you had direct connections and, again, relays and serial commands and, IR and just items that were point to point already. There was nothing that was a transmission medium in between. I think the first gripe is like, why is it so difficult? The reason why it is so difficult is because your data can get outside of that device, or outside data can get to your device. And, from an exposure network and a corporate network, those are things to consider. And as we keep moving more to a software or soft-based world, it's just going to be part of your day. And so, to just kind of hold off and say, we'll deal with it. That's going to be, it's not the challenge. It's just a matter of, in the beginning, when we switched over from direct connections to IP communication, we all had a learning curve on how this worked. And I should just be able to set this static and, forget what the network's doing. My stuff works. And then you find out that you completely crashed the other side of the network because you just kind of went off on your own and decided that you knew best. Same thing happens with security. In authentication and communication is that you're part of a greater team. And more importantly, you're typically not the shot caller, depending on the vertical that you're in. So even more so, it's a matter of being sensitive, learning to communicate, and learning kind of the overall rules that are within, the whatever the ecosystem that you happen to be in. I think mobile, fortunately, has already created kind of the training wheels of the expectations. Every mobile device you have now has two-factor authorization. You just kind of get used to those functions. So I think when you take those functions and you expand it to your automation systems, you learn that, it is important to keep security and privacy and liability and all of these things down. It's just it is a process, and you have to be willing to put in the time, not only in learning your skills, but also how to communicate what you need against the requirements of whatever the corporate or the government or any of those networks look like wherever you happen to be in your vertical.
Paul, tell us a little bit about why we need to be securing AV systems, because most people think about security, they think about protecting their data, they think about protecting their confidential information, but AV systems don't really isn't something that you typically think about when it comes to security. But what are the risks involved with the vulnerabilities of AV systems?
Well, there's a term that's called the attack surface, and these attack vectors. And as we add more and more AV devices to a network, to an organization, we're basically increasing that attack surface that a hacker could come in and do something bad. So or steal data. So for some good examples, there are some examples of AV devices that researchers, good hackers, as they might want to call them, ethical hackers, have shown us, sadly, whether it be wireless presentation devices or a certain device that sits in the middle of a table that has an animal name that is used with cameras and microphones, or a touch panel that could be used to listen in on, and spy on hotel guests. These things are hackable, essentially, and either on their own, or they can be a way to get to other parts of your network. They can be used as like a pivot point. An IP camera is a good example of that. If we get on Shodan, you can see a lot of AV devices out there, and oftentimes you can access them. So different ways devices can be used in a compromise. There could be unpatched security vulnerabilities. A lot of times AV devices are overlooked in that patching. There also could be bad default passwords. We're kind of known to have 1, 2, 3, 4 or similar passwords in our history. I'm sure you guys have had some laughs along the way. And there was a bill passed in California in 2020, the SB 327 bill, that forced a lot of our industry to start having passwords that either had to be set with a unique password right upon the first boot, or defaulted to a serial number, so at least the serial number was unique, although a little bit predictable, so not that strong. But so these laws are passing. There are also, unencrypted streams out there being sent along the network, where you could just simply add a decoder and, tap into a stream, and these multicast streams or whatever. So that's, another thing that could. So it's a little bit about privacy. It's a little bit about protecting your data, and then just also just back to fundamentals, things we learned from Target, like, if your email and your password are compromised and you're a contractor on a much bigger project, you could be used as a backdoor into that system. Your email could be compromised if you have a login, a maintenance login, let's call it, or something like that. It gets back to, I don't know if you guys ever seen the movie Lawnmower Man. There was a maintenance backdoor that he used at the end of the movie. And spoiler alert, it's not a very good movie, by the way, but fun graphics for the 90s. It's kind of that. So how can it be done? Like, the sky's the limit in a way. So I just kind of assume everything is in a way probably compromisable, and try to isolate it is usually my approach.
Rich, Paul, shared a lot of good information there, and we're looking at the vulnerabilities of products. We're looking at passwords and making good decisions in terms of implementing secure measures. Whose responsibility are these things, and what is a programmer's role in that?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the first part is any correspondence or any communication or any documentation you have should be secure. And if you're ever sharing information, you need to do it over secure methods. What you use is entirely up to you, whether you have it locked down or a password protector or any of that. But even just that, you shouldn't be texting people passwords. You shouldn't be sending unencrypted passwords over email where it's like, oh, what's the login for this processor? I mean, all the day-to-day things that happen for speed and for, ease, that's the first step, right? Anytime you have something that is authentication based, like, protect the passwords, protect the logins, protect the credentials, especially if, again, you're sharing it. Because typically at the end of a project, you've got to do a handoff, right? So you're going to have a list of all the devices that you're talking to, all of the IP addresses, logins, passwords, ... You may be communicating to sensitive devices. Well, you're going to have your passwords potentially in your code to access those devices. So, it is, an end-to-end, endeavor that you have to, we always say security isn't easy because it's supposed to be secure. Again, end of the project, everybody's breathing down your neck. There's a quarterly meeting or an all hands meeting or ... happening in 48 hours, and we've got to get this done. First thing to do is start looking at the shortcuts, right? You start emailing everybody. Everybody's coming in. The PM's coming in. The programmer's coming in. The technician's coming in. Oh, I need to log into this. Oh, send me the password. I need to everybody has this story, right? And that's the hard part in the beginning, is to say, no, we have a process. And in order to follow the process so that we are not exposed, because again, you get a data breach, I know Paul brought up, the Target one is the most famous one, right? This had somebody who had nothing to do with the corporate network at all, right? Was the vulnerability point, right? In any given event, especially the higher profile, I know we had a project a couple of years ago. Fortunately, we had nothing to do with it, but it was a large bank. And they had like a shareholders meeting or something that went on. And the communications and for the video conference and for everything, something went weird. From the very top down, they were screaming for heads to roll, and it came to the point where, everybody who was even associated, even on the periphery with that event had to basically show receipts. Say, wasn't me. I didn't do it, And that's the thing, right? We always consider that as we sometimes operate with these systems in best case scenario, which, thank goodness, 99.5% of the time, that's what's going to happen, right? The worst case scenario is not going to happen. But depending on your vertical, depending on the sensitivity of you're dealing with, if you're dealing with HIPAA. If you're dealing with anything that's SEC related, if you're anything that's banking related, anything like from a large corporation or enterprise that trade secret related, like that's a massive vulnerability and liability. And I know most programmers aren't going to carry that kind of umbrella for that kind of damage that occurs. I mean, the last thing you want to see is getting that letter, saying we're coming after you. And that's the thing to remember, is that when an event happens, people get angry and people look for somebody to blame. You don't want to be the person to blame. And a lot of times you're going to be the first one on the front line, because whatever device that you have has stenciled on the front of it X. And so their first thing is, well, if they did X, we have the X guy who programmed this. Must be his fault, her fault, right? Like, that's just human nature. And anybody who's done this long enough knows that you need a thick skin and you can't take anything personally, because even after you show that it wasn't you, I've always said sometimes it's better to be heard than to be right, because focusing on being right and saying, oh, it wasn't me, and see, I told you, doesn't help your relationship at all, right? Being heard is saying, here's what happened, here's what it break down, and being a solution provider. Again, you hope you don't have a breach, but you also have to take a look at what you're contributing to the breach. And a big part of it is process. And so coming in, and that is like, if you're a younger programmer, asking, the person who's training you, asking the project manager, going back to the salesperson and say, did you plan for this? Did you plan for the fact that this is, from a security standpoint, way different than somebody's home theater, right? Did you put the time in, the project management time, the documentation time, the team meeting time, right? Because you guys are saying, oh, you got to get done, and you're waiting on that big commission check to come out, and, once closeout happens. But, again, you start taking the profitability away from the project, you start cutting corners. And it's tough because nobody wants to be that bearer of bad news of the naysayer, right? But there is that point where you've got to, like shows like this, or for people that you reach out to, and Avix or everything else, is like, here are the things that have happened. Here's what we're doing to prevent it from happening, right? It's tough to lead with bad news, but it's important to say, we're not saying that's going to happen to you, but this is what we put in place so it doesn't. And yes, it takes longer. It's a little more tedious, but security is not easy because it's secure, and that's the hardest part. It really is, because human nature is like, it's inconvenient. So fine, right? It's what is it? Fast, reliable, cheap, pick 2 out of 3. Security is kind of like that fourth leg in there now, right? It's like pick 2 out of 4. And that is, kind of the just the overall approach from a programming standpoint, that you got to come in and be able to say, all right, here we go.
Rich, you brought that up on our last call, that sort of heads will roll, finger pointing thing. You must have had, you must be kind of bruised up from an experience or two, I imagine, your scars.
I'm glad that horror story happened to me, because we were prepared, right? We were prepared. We had everything. But if you're not prepared, stuff like that's company killers. No joke. It is a company killer. Even just losing the client,
I mean, there's this term in security called the root cause analysis, right? They want to know where it came from, but it's almost like, they want to know the human too, right? In many regards. And, he said showing receipts, getting sign off on things. It kind of gets in also this idea of change management, and, from the IT side, if they're adding AV devices to the network, are they recording the firmware version? Are they patching in the same cadence and treating it a vulnerability like they do all their servers and their virtual servers and things like that? And because in the end, you realize, I think, when you work at bigger security, or when you've been in our business for a while, is that you're never going to really have true 100% security. If you do, you're probably missing something, But what you want to know is, you want to know where you might not be secure, like what vulnerabilities you may have to accept, which ones we call mitigate, where there's a vulnerability, but hey, if I just isolate it over there, then it's not vulnerable to the outside. And having as much idea as you can of what's going on, mitigating the bigger risk up front, realizing, okay, well, what would happen if someone did get a hold of this? There's a lot of our devices that are vulnerable if you have physical access to them, right? And so the answer to that is lock it in a closet or lock it in a rack, just keep people away from them and they're probably fine. So it's interesting because you've harped on that a couple times about I've only been on the show 2 or 3 times, so but I remember you were like, they want to know who did it, which I find really interesting, because from the public side, when a breach happens, no one wants to take responsibility for it usually. Like the company that has a breach is like, no, well, sorry, here's a letter saying your data was leaked, and go change your password and we'll offer you free credit monitoring for a year. But the actual responsibility or someone going to jail, that didn't happen very much, so it's interesting on the internal side how people get their hand slapped or worse. So
yeah, it's a paradox, because again, it's and again, dealing in corporate, right? You're dealing with a C-level person. An end user doesn't know or doesn't necessarily feel they have the authority to call out for heads to roll. If you're dealing in an executive boardroom, if you're dealing in a NOC or something like that, you're dealing with personalities, you're dealing with people, and they're already used to that, right? They're just looking for a reason to go off. And you need to know that. And it's just like, we kind of chuckle about it, but you really do need to know that going in. I know we had one, and it was great. We were grateful for it. We were dealing with a large attorney, and they were ISO certified, which was awesome, because every single step of the way, there was a security checklist that was occurring. Anytime we were working on the project, all your things that you were talking about, Paul, it's like firmware was logged, changes were logged. Everything from a step-by-step level was logged from a standpoint to be able to say, we're X certified, and to be able to, it's like, we're as secure as we can be, right? Like you just said, we're not 100% secure, but we're as locked down as we can be in order for us to feel comfortable that we've taken every measure possible. And it's great when you can deal with organizations. Part of it is like, oh gosh, here we go again. But you got to kind of be willing to protect that, because honestly, the more fixated they are on security, it's easier for you. Because you can just say, great, I just got to follow the rules. When they're lax, that's when it's a problem. Because, again, it comes down to, well, you didn't tell me. I didn't know. How was I supposed? Well, I'm not going to tell you your job. I'm not going to alienate a client, but you should have known in the first place. So, and we're kind of in that mid-ground right now. Right? Like you just said, nobody, in the public, when it happens, nobody wants to take responsibility, or they'll say, what was it? Decisions were made. What's the non-apology apology? Mistakes were made, right? The non-apology apology, right? Because it is so big and it's kind of abstract. When you're dealing with a specific point of failure, I'd love to say, human nature won't take over. Human nature takes over. And so, if you kind of do that in the back of your head going out, I touched that stove once, it was hot. I really don't want to go down that road again. And for me, for programmers coming in, is like, I tell those horror stories, because I'm like, I lucked out. It's like, it could have been a lot worse for me. Thankfully it wasn't. But more than anything else, I don't want anybody to have to go through that kind of stress, because it's stressful. And it comes from all sides, right? And if you're a programmer working for a company or something, now you've got your management breathing down your neck as well. How did you let that happen? It was like, wait a minute, those things occur. And so again, it's like, sometimes you got to dig your feet in and say, these are the methods. These are the best practices. No, it's not convenient for a reason. And if you don't want to go down that road, then okay, here's your sign off, right? Here's your sign off that said, you, in the interest of speed, you're doing this, and you've got it cataloged and emailed, and per your previous email that you CC everybody. But, again, covering your tracks it's a last resort, when you can just go ahead and say, look, this is the best practice. I know, and nobody likes it. If nobody likes it, that means it's working. And you go from there.
Paul, you talked a little bit about the launching points and the vulnerability of products and so forth. What is the industry doing, or what should they be doing to ensure that products are not the weak link that because basically any vulnerability makes everything vulnerable. So what should the industry be doing in that regard?
A few things you can do. First of all, I talked about patching and updating. I know you as programmers know about downloading the latest firmware and updating. Figuring out who's managing that, who's responsible for updating is almost more important than is it updated. When we talk about a human part of it, looking at which ports, which protocols are used to establish connectivity. If vendors can't answer that, then that might be a red flag. I'm looking at a cheat sheet here. Select solutions that provide timely software updates. Select solutions that have centralized control, so you can push those updates out. Robust user management features, so not everyone is an admin to the device, that they can't go in and change a password on their own. MFA, of course, if possible.
And that's multi-factor authentication. We have to define our
define our acronyms.
Yeah.
Look for those vendors that put out white papers on their security that can, there was a term that was called, I think, a volatility or something paper that was more about, can it hold data? There was a certificate of volatility that that's been thrown around a little bit, but that's really more about, like, does it store data when you power it off and power it back on? Almost all of our devices store some kind of state, because they have to, they're not just going to factory reset every time you turn them on and off. Do they use something called mutual TLS, which is an authentication where the two connections authenticate, kind of like HDMI, where it won't send unless it's sure it knows what's on the other end of the cable. Some of our AV over IP solutions don't do that. So there is a way to drop in a listening device, so to speak, onto a network and tap into a stream. Let's see what else I have written down here. End-to-end encryption, of some sort. The government's actually pushing for that in wireless. They're pushing for it. I believe in video conferencing. There's a push from the federal government for better end-to-end encryption happening. Just having those conversations. Talking more about who's in charge of it, and don't be afraid to, I've said this in past things, put on your bad actor hat, as I call it, and grab your partner's design, your coworker's design. A lot of people check each other's drawings, but throw on that hacker hat, put your hood up, your hacker hood on, and say, if I was going to do some damage to this system or break in, what could I do? We tend not to think about that or have those discussions in our industry. We tend to get things just up and running and then walk away. So just stepping back and saying, hey, have you closed ports that you're not using? Have you set up an access control list, for instance? have you change the password since you set it up, since you gave the password to all the installers and texted it to them on a Friday night when they had to get into the system. Maybe you should go and update that password to something that only the user knows. And where are they storing those passwords? So, it's a hard thing to implement because it's usually more time, and in AV land, time is money. Everywhere else, time is money, but we're often being pushed to get something up and running. We are rarely looking at it from a security standpoint. Can you put that camera in? Oh, look, I can see the camera on my screen. Great. But who else can see the camera, right? Or is the camera susceptible? Has it been patched? We rarely ask those things. So start having that sort of state of mind a bit. And just assume that it all can be, that there's a vulnerability in everything, sadly. And not only that, but people are also vulnerable. So they can be blackmailed or bribed. A lot of people can be. So you gotta assume the worst, sadly. You put on the pessimism hat. It's hard in these days. You want to be happy and optimistic these days, but when it comes to security, it's hard to do that.
I thank you for that list, and I think that that's really great information. Hopefully our audience was able to capture all of that, because the things that you said were really great gems. I want to wrap up just by asking, and do you think that there'll be a time where we'll start to see AV integrators employing somebody who is going to do like penetration testing and be, figure out, is a system secure enough to be able to be turned over?
The short answer is yes. I actually want to back up and give credit to someone I was stealing a lot of that list from, was Ramin Aranpour, I believe his name is, from Infocom. He gave a session at Infocom called Secure Connectivity, and so I was looking at his notes to grab some of those. So give him credit. I'm really happy with some of the Infocom sessions on security, by the way. I'm really glad we're getting into it more. But in terms of pen testing and things like that, maybe, yes. Been talked about for a number of years. There's been talks about, quote unquote hackathons or things like that. I'm going to say that's going to come from the client side, probably. The bigger corporate clients will hire penetration testers, third party or internal red teams, to try to hack different things, and get access to different things in their networks. I experienced one of those at my last job. It was quite a learning experience. It wasn't AV related, but we did have AV devices on our network. So it's probably going to come from the IT client side, or in my new line of work, from the government side. The government's going to poke and prod. In terms of an AV company hiring a pen tester to come in, I don't necessarily see that happening because, again, of the cost. But I have heard some rumors of some people in our industry, not necessarily setting up pen testing, but hosting groups or, let's say, summits, that sort of thing, where they would run through some of the typical vulnerable points of AV devices, and in like a classroom kind of setting, and then have a bunch of devices there that those students could then try to crack, so to speak, try to hack into in a laboratory environment. So it wouldn't necessarily be a quote unquote hackathon, but it would be a bit hands-on, and might uncover something that we may not have seen before. So that's not about a network penetration as much as I think device penetration. My biggest fear is always still someone's credentials getting compromised, a name and a password that gets you into something that you shouldn't be getting into. But I've heard that maybe on the horizon around next Infocom, and it would not be an Avixa Infocom thing, but it may be adjacent to it. There's been some talk about that. I've heard some rumors, and because the people that care about that sort of thing are really starting to get frustrated that our industry is not doing anything like that. Because if you go to something like Infocom, no one wants to see their product compromised at a trade show. I mean, that rumor would spread like wildfire, like no one wants that, but we all want security. So it's something I thought about doing. I thought about acquiring a bunch of gear and trying to, do some of the things. I've only done this stuff in a lab environment, with school. But my problem is I don't want to pay for the gear. I don't want to like spend all my money on eBay or whatever buying a bunch of AV gear just to see if I can break it. I'll probably end up just letting the magic smoke out, trying. But there's some groups that would have access to lots of devices. If you can think about what sort of groups that are in our industry that may have access to lots of AD devices or sort of closets full of them that they may be able to, use some of those for testing or training purposes, teaching. There's another hint. It's being talked about. But just get back to your initial question. I'll wrap up soon, I promise. There's been some other talk about, hey, we should just offer scanning, Tenable scanning. Tenable's one of those scanners you can use to check for vulnerabilities, and we can offer Tenable scanning of devices as like a consultant, come in and run Tenable. Tenable's about $5,000 per year, I think, is the license. So you'd have to make enough money to justify $5,000. But I mean, there's probably a need for it. It's just is anyone asking for it? Like, is anyone saying, I'd like to give you money to scan my? It comes down to dollars, unfortunately, in our business. So it'll probably come from corporate, I imagine.
Oh, appreciate that. And this is a good place for us to wrap this up. And certainly a wealth of information and an ongoing conversation that we need to be having. So I appreciate all this insight. Paul, thank you for being with us today. Paul Konikowski from Cronos. How could people get in touch with you? How can they learn more about Cronos and anything else that you're up to?
We did just launch a new website, kronosllc.com. So you can learn more about our company there. We do AV and similar for our U.S. government and military applications. The best way to reach me is probably through LinkedIn. I'm not on the Twitter anymore, and I just keep Facebook for family, really, and friends. But you can find me on LinkedIn. Paul Konikowski is Konikowski. Is probably the best way to reach me. I'd rather not give out my work email here, but you can probably find me on LinkedIn, and we can go from there.
Appreciate that. Rich, another great episode. Certainly some gems that I hope everybody can get value out of. How can people get in touch with you? How can they learn more about Fregosa Design and anything else you want to share?
First off, like rewind like the past 10 minutes and everything that Paul was talking about. That's gold right there. The big part of it is, it's there's lots of information out there. So grabbing that information and being able to kind of focus in for it being industry specific, what Paul said was the home run. I know I'm going to be looking for it. So myself, however, if you want to listen to my ramblings, I guess you could find me on the interwebs at our Fregosa for the socials, fregosadesign.com. But really, first and foremost, where I hope you find me is on AVNation.tv. I got to mix it up a little bit on where I drop it in. I hope you find me here on AVNation.tv and our suite of shows serving all of the vertical markets in the AV industry. Hopefully here with my partner Steve, elsewhere, Resi Week, AV Week, tons of other great shows, tons of great episodes this past month. Like lots of great episodes across lots of different verticals. So check out the website, support our sponsors, but really the best place we hope you find us is here because it we like creating this content hopefully so that you can pick and choose what you think interests you.
Absolutely. Just to throw in a few ed tech has been promoting us as well. So we one of the podcasts that I listen to, as well as Women in AV and AV Career Mastermind, all great stuff out there, as Rich said. And please check those out at avnation.tv. And we have lots of recent shows that were recorded on site at Infocom, so you can catch up with people in that way. If you don't already know, this show is on YouTube as well as on your favorite podcast player, so you can get a video or an audio version, whichever you prefer. We appreciate you listening and watching in either capacity. Please leave us a rating, review, anything that you want to share, and reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. For me, you could reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media. My company, Control Concepts, is at controlconcepts.net. And we help programmers by interfacing with products and providing some of the building blocks that are needed for to make projects work and to add functionality. So you can check that out and reach out if you want to learn more. We really like to hear from you, and we'd like to continue to keep this podcast relevant. So if you want to be a guest or you have a topic you want to share, please let us know. We definitely like to hear from you. And until next time, this has been A State of Control,
the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
Hi, this is Jennifer Goodyear
and Erica Carroll
from the Women in AV podcast, where we are encouraged by the incredible stories of women in AV.
Listen in on fun, empowering conversations as we chat with inspiring women, breaking barriers and creating their own path in the industry.
Check out Women in AV on avnation.tv or wherever you get your podcasts.